Hey everybody, this week, new beginning. Start the new book, second book of the Torah, the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, and it opens with the Torah portion of Shemot. So the same name, the book and the Torah portion are Shemot. I mentioned that the book of Shemot is called Exodus, but in Hebrew, the word Shemot means names. And the name of the Torah portion, as well as the entire book, comes from the opening words of this week's Torah portion, the first words of the book of Shemot, the Eila Shemot B'nai Yisrael Habayim Mitzrayma. These are the names of the Jewish people, the children of Israel, who have come down to Egypt. And so that's where this word, the name of the Torah portion, the name of the book, come from. Now, it's interesting. It would seem that the English name for the book, Exodus, is a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more indicative of what would happen in the book. The story of the Jewish people coming down to Egypt and experiencing the exile in Egypt, and then, of course, their liberation, the exodus from Egypt, and their sojourn through the desert, which is the topic that's covered primarily in this book, and the building of the tabernacle. So the word Shemot, names, doesn't really seem to indicate anything. And yet, we know that everything is, of course, intentional and purposeful. And so we need to understand a little bit about this idea of names. So the Torah portion opens with Ve'ela Shemot B'nai Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Israel who have come down to Egypt. And of course, the question asked is, we already know their names. We already know who's come down to Egypt. The children of Israel have been counted already a couple of weeks ago. They were also mentioned and listed and named as they were being born. And so this review of their names seems to be extra. So Rashi right away comments on it and says the idea of the people being named again, listed again, is because God shows his love for the Jewish people, and he's always counting them, just like something that you really care about, something you really love. You're constantly looking, you're checking, you're counting it. And so to the Jewish people, God counts them all the time. And so that shows his love for the Jewish people. But there's another explanation given. The Midrash says that when the Torah opens, when this week's Torah portion opens with the words "Ve'ela Shemot B'nai Yisrael," that when we were about to describe the exile in Egypt, we start by listing the names of the children of Israel. It's telling us that one of the things that the people did while they were in Egypt, and one of the things that led to them being worthy of actually leaving Egypt and being emancipated and freed, was the fact that they didn't change their names. These are the names that they came down to Egypt with, and these are the names they left Egypt with as well. So the sages list three things that the Jewish people did while in Egypt, three things to sort of stave off assimilation that served as a merit for them to be able to leave Egypt. We're not going to focus on the other two. Let's just focus on the fact that they didn't change their names. They kept their names. So even though the Jewish people were somewhat assimilated, some were very assimilated in Egypt, but one of the things that they didn't assimilate were their names. They retained their names. They came down as Reuven and Shimon, and they left as Reuven and Shimon. Now, a name is a funny thing. Kabbalah teaches us the power of names. It says that that Adam was very wise. And how does the Torah tell us about his wisdom, how wise he was? Is that God passes all the animals, all the creations before Adam, and Adam names everything. Well, what's the big deal to name things? So it's explained because the name expresses the characteristics of something. So Adam, looking at everything, he was able to see its essence and able to see its personality and its function, and he was able to give them the appropriate name, the name that conveys and expresses it. So on the one hand, we say that the name sort of expresses your essence. On the other hand, we know, we all at some point or another give names, right? You have children, you give names, and even though we're told by the Kabbalists that we have a form of divine intuition when naming our children, but for the most part, the names are somewhat arbitrary, or seemingly arbitrary. Furthermore, we know plenty of people that have the same name and they're very different personalities. So in a practical sense, it's hard for us to see how a name conveys sort of the essence of a person when you can have two people with the same name and be they can be very, very different. Also, the idea of a name is also something external in the sense that if you were hypothetically the only person in existence in the world, you wouldn't need a name. So our names are really there just to identify us and to be able to differentiate between one person and another. So the name is really not about us, it's more about everybody else, so they can know who we're talking about. So on the one hand, you have names that we're told convey sort of the essence. On the other hand, we're told that names are, and our experience bears out that names are somewhat arbitrary and random and don't really express anything of the person. And yet, we do know as well, when you want to get somebody's attention, you call them by their name. You know, whenever you hear your full name being uttered, you know you're in trouble. You did something wrong. So there's something about the name that does elicit a reaction from an individual when you're called by your name that gets your attention. And so this is what the Torah is teaching us with the opening of this week's Torah portion, that we're going down to exile, we're going down to Egypt, we're going down to a hostile environment, and one of the things that the Jewish people always retained was their identity. They always retained their name. They always knew who they were and who they represented, what they represented. And so that's the deeper meaning of the fact that they didn't change their names. The fact that regardless of how they integrated into Egyptian society, they always knew who they were at their core. It's interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot in the last couple of months. This idea of our identity and knowing who we are at our core. That even though we might live lives that are maybe not necessarily in tune and aligned with our core, but it's still very much who we are. The fact that the Jewish people rally in times of crisis and in times of persecution and come out. I was talking to somebody at the shul a couple of weeks ago, and he said, nowadays, whenever he meets somebody new in a business meeting or anything completely unrelated to any whether it be in a social circle or in a professional environment, he says, the first thing I tell people is, hi, I'm Jewish. Nice to meet you. That's the first thing that he says, to just put that out there right away, right on the table, something that he had never done before. And so the Jewish people collectively were called the Jewish people. The Jewish people, that word comes from the word in Hebrew, Yehuda, we're Yehudim. And what does it say about us? What's the name of the Jewish people? Yehudim, or Jewish. What does that bear out? So that expresses the fact that a Jew is always connected to God and is always willing to give his life or her life for God. That's what Yehuda, as the Jewish people being called Yehuda, that's what it represents, an unbreakable bond with God, one that can never be severed. And it's telling that in a time and an environment when it might be easier to sort of hide your name, to change your name, to assimilate, it actually brings out our very core, our very essence. That when we see trouble, when we see persecution, when we see all these things, it's like calling out our names, the collective name of the Jewish people, calling us out to reveal our core and our deep commitment to God. One of the things that struck me, really on Shmini Atzeret, actually, when news of what was happening in Israel was trickling in before we really knew anything and the extent of it here in Miami. But one of the things that struck me very hard in the davening of that day, and has struck me every Shabbos really since, is one of the things we say in the prayer, which is that the Jewish people are called Mekadshe Shemecha. So that's another name for the Jewish people, Mekadshe Shemecha, the sanctifiers of your name. That the Jewish people, by our very existence, not just people that give their lives or even prepare to give their lives, but our very existence, the fact that the Jewish people walk the earth, that we're referred to as Mekadshe Shemecha, sanctifiers of God's name. We bear witness to him and we sanctify his name just by our mere existence. That's at the core of who we are. And that's something we're seeing playing out as our name is being called, or as we call out our own names as proud Jews. If you look a little further in this week's Torah portion, chapter 3, right, when God introduces himself to Moses and tells Moses that he's decided that he's going to be the one to lead the people out of Egypt, and he sends Moses with a mission back and a message to the Jewish people and to Pharaoh, first thing Moses says is, again, we find this idea of names. He says, I'm going to come back to the people. I'm going to say, what's his name? What should I tell them? And that's kind of a curious question. And a deep analysis of that episode and that conversation is really beyond, obviously, the scope of our 15 minutes here together. But essentially, Moses is asking God that question. What your name, what kind of character, what personality, what is it about you that you want me to tell them? Or they're going to ask me about you. They're going to want to know about you. See, the Jewish people know, we know, just like your name it expresses you on the one hand, and yet sort of conceals your true core is elicited, and yet you still remain kind of enigmatic or mystery just from your name. I don't know much about you. The same is true with God. God has names. God is knowable to us. God's essence is really a mystery that's beyond, and yet we know with absolute conviction of God's existence. But we know it from his names, from the way he interacts with us, from his character, from his behaviors, from the way he interacts with us. And so Moses says to God, when I'm going to come to the Jewish people, it's time for them to be redeemed. What do you want me to tell them about you? And God says, my name, this is in chapter 3, the middle verses there of Exodus. He says, "My Eya Asher Eya, I shall be that which I am, or I am what I am. I will be what I will be." Translated any other way, it's still enigmatic, that statement. But essentially, what God was saying is, tell them that I've always been with them and I always will be with them. That I'm always found right there next to them, right there with them. That whatever they have going on, whatever might be going on in their lives, whatever challenges they face, I am in that experience together with them. I never leave them alone. I never abandon them. That's what God wants us to know. And so God tells us his name is, I'm always with you. The Jewish people, our name, Yehuda, Yehudim, the Jew, our name bears witness to the fact that we are Mekache Shmecha, we are sanctifiers of God's name, that we're always with him, we never abandon him. And so let's take a lesson from the name of this week's Torah portion, as well as the name of the new book that we're about to start reading, and reading all the hardships, challenges, as well as the good times, the redemption and freedom and liberation of the Jewish people, the purpose, the building of the tabernacle, the home for God, all of the positive things, as well as just the difficult beginning, all of that, and let us identify with it. Let us proclaim loud and proud that that is our name. Our name is that we are connected to God. Our name is that we be a witness to God's existence. Our name is that God is always with us, and we're always try to be mindful of that. And when we can say that loud and proud, God willing, that will elicit God's essence, where God will be manifest and revealed in the world in open and revealed good, peace and prosperity and safety and security. Thank you all for joining.